They said the first kings of Earth ruled for 241,000 years. Historians called it myth, until someone found their names carved in stone, in perfect mathematical sequence. What historians dismissed as legend, the tablets recorded as measurement, cosmic calculations disguised as divine reign. The Sumerian texts weren't supposed to contain astronomical knowledge that would remain undiscovered for 5 millennia. Yet there it was. Orbital periods of planets they shouldn't have seen, celestial mechanics they couldn't have known, and references to a world beyond perception that returned on a vast elliptical orbit. They called this world Nibiru, home of the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to Earth. Modern science dismissed it as mythology until the mathematics began to align. The ancient measurements, the sacred ratios, the temple orientations, all pointing to something moving in the distant darkness beyond Neptune. The secret wasn't in what the Sumerians worshipped, but in what they measured, not in their gods, but in their numbers. What if the oldest civilization on Earth wasn't recording myths, but documenting observations? What if their temples weren't places of worship, but instruments of cosmic calculation? And what if the Anunnaki weren't gods at all, but astronomers who became divine only through the distortion of time? Mesopotamia, 3500 BCE. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity's first cities emerged from the mud and reed. Eridu, Ur, Nippur, names carved from silence into history. Here, beneath the merciless sun, the Sumerians built not just civilization, but the first framework for understanding reality itself. The clay tablets recovered from these sites tell of beings called the Anunnaki, who descended from Nibiru, a celestial body, on a 3,600-year orbit. For centuries, archaeologists cataloged these as creation myths, religious texts written by priest scribes to explain the inexplicable. The consensus was clear. Primitive people invented gods to make sense of the cosmos. But the tablets held something else, something that shouldn't exist. When archaeologists examined the astronomical sections of cuneiform texts like the Emuel Apen and Enuma Anu Enlil, they discovered mathematical relationships of celestial bodies that precisely matched modern calculations. The tablets described planetary phenomena impossible to observe without telescopes. The rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, the orbital pattern of Pluto. In the ruins of Sippar, they found circular astronomical calculators with measurement systems that divided the sky into segments matching our modern 360-degree system. Their calendar, preserved in stone, tracked not just lunar cycles but the precession of equinoxes, a 25,120-year cycle that no civilization could observe within a single lifetime. The Temple of Eridu, oldest religious structure on Earth, aligned perfectly with celestial positions that wouldn't recur for thousands of years. Its foundations, laid nearly 6 millennia ago, already understood prime numbers, golden ratios, and orbital mechanics. Each time a researcher touched these artifacts, certainty dissolved. The tablets spoke of gods who measured the heavens, who understood genetic codes, who traveled between worlds. The Anunnaki weren't described as magical beings, but as methodical observers who recorded, calculated, and predicted. What if we've been reading the evidence backward all these centuries? What if the temples weren't built to worship gods, but to track them? The first contradictions emerged in the 1950s, when scholars finally translated the complete Sumerian king list. The text recorded rulers who reigned for impossible lengths, kings who lived for thousands of years. Most academics filed these accounts under mythology, yet the same tablets accurately recorded verifiable historical kings and events with precise dates. In the forbidden archives of the Baghdad Museum, before war scattered its treasures, there existed a collection of clay tablets known as the Eridu Genesis. Unlike their biblical counterparts, these flood accounts contained precise astronomical timing, describing celestial positions that modern computer models confirm actually occurred approximately 11,000 years ago. The dating matched perfectly with geological evidence of a massive deluge at the end of the Younger Dryas period. How could ancient scribes, writing millennia before modern astronomy, record celestial configurations that actually occurred? And why would they connect these configurations with cataclysmic events on Earth? The answer remained hidden in plain sight within the word Anunnaki itself. The standard translation, "those who from heaven to earth came," had always suggested divine descent. But when philologists re-examined the root words, they discovered an alternate meaning: those who observed and measured the sky. Not gods, but observers. Not rulers, but recorders. The temple at Eridu contained something even more perplexing. Beneath its ziggurat foundations, archaeologists discovered a chamber sealed with bitumen, containing tablets unlike any others. These black tablets used a variant form of cuneiform that took decades to decipher. When finally translated in the 1990s, they revealed astronomical calculations for tracking an object invisible to the naked eye, a body on an elliptical orbit that approached our solar system only once every several millennia. The tablets called this object Nibiru, and the calculations matched what a modern astronomer would use to track a long-period celestial body. The mathematics was unmistakable. Whoever made these calculations understood Kepler's laws of planetary motion thousands of years before Kepler was born. Even more disturbing was the discovery at Nippur in 1987, when researchers found a tablet fragment containing what appeared to be a star map. When digitized and projected against the night sky, it showed not the current stellar positions, but the exact configuration of stars visible from Mesopotamia 13,000 years ago. This predated Sumerian civilization itself by nearly 7,000 years. Who observed the stars in 11,000 BCE with enough precision to create these records? And why did the Sumerians possess this knowledge? The mystery deepened when linguists connected certain passages about the Anunnaki to descriptions of their activities. The texts repeatedly used the term ME, usually translated as divine powers, but context suggested something closer to information transfer or data. The Anunnaki were described as bringing these me to Earth, not magical powers but knowledge. One passage stated, "The Anunnaki measured the paths of heaven and earth, set in motion the crossing of celestial bodies, and established the boundaries of all things." This wasn't religious worship. It was observational astronomy. In the 1970s, the astronomer Zecharia Sitchin proposed that Nibiru was a real planet on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit, and that the Anunnaki were its inhabitants. The scientific community dismissed his work as pseudoscience. Yet as modern telescopes scan the outer reaches of our solar system, astronomers have identified orbital anomalies suggesting massive, undiscovered objects beyond Neptune, precisely where ancient Sumerian tablets placed Nibiru. NASA's ongoing search for Planet X follows mathematical models strikingly similar to those described in the ancient texts. The Sumerians called this distant world the planet of crossing, and positioned it exactly where contemporary astrophysicists are now looking. Perhaps most compelling was the tablet discovered at Tel Brak in 2001, a fragmented astronomical diary describing an observation method involving the chamber of reflection, a device that collected light through a small aperture and projected it onto a surface. The description matched the fundamental principle of a camera obscura, a precursor to the telescope, supposedly not invented until the Renaissance. With this device, the ancient astronomers claimed to track objects invisible to the naked eye. They recorded these observations not as divine revelation but as systematic measurement. The Sumerians' own words reveal the truth. The gods measured the foundations of Earth, walked the perimeter of the heavens, and set in place the structures of reality. These weren't religious metaphors. They were the technical achievements of astronomers so advanced that later civilizations could only understand them as divine. If the Anunnaki were indeed astronomers rather than gods, what else might have been misinterpreted? What if every Sumerian creation myth was actually a scientific document, translated through the limitations of ancient language? And if they possessed knowledge impossible for their time, where did this knowledge come from? The evidence hidden within the world's oldest texts pointed to a disturbing possibility, that everything we thought we knew about human history was merely the shadow of a greater truth, waiting in the darkness beyond perception. As translations improved and archaeological discoveries mounted, academic institutions faced a growing contradiction. The established chronology of human development, the neat progression from primitive to advanced, began to fracture against the evidence. Scholars trained in conventional archaeology found themselves at odds with a new generation of researchers who dared to interpret the Sumerian legacy literally. Traditional Assyriologists insisted that references to the Anunnaki were purely mythological, creation stories told by a pre-scientific culture. Yet the mathematical precision in the texts defied such dismissal. The tablets didn't just describe gods. They recorded their movements with astronomical accuracy, using a sexagesimal system, base 60, that we still use today for measuring time and angles. Our 60-second minute, 60-minute hour, and 360-degree circle, all inheritances from these ancient astronomers. The schism widened in 2006 when a team from the University of Pennsylvania reanalyzed the famous Warka vase, a 5,000-year-old artifact depicting what conventional archaeology interpreted as a religious offering scene. Using computational analysis, they discovered that the proportions between figures on the vase precisely matched the ratios between orbital periods of the planets. What appeared decorative was actually mathematical, a stone computer calculating celestial mechanics. In the remote desert between Iraq and Syria, away from institutional eyes, a privately funded expedition uncovered something even more remarkable: a library of tablets describing what appeared to be genetic procedures. The conventional translation had rendered these as creation myths, gods molding humans from clay. But the specific terminology matched modern descriptions of genetic engineering with uncomfortable precision. One passage, previously translated as Enki and Ninmah created humans in their image, contained additional technical details that modern translators recognized as describing something like recombinant DNA. They separated the essence, combined it with earth, and quickened it with the blood of a god who had been sacrificed, whose nature had been unlocked, and whose spirit had been bound to clay. The clay wasn't metaphorical. It was a medium containing genetic material. Most shocking was the discovery that these tablets described not just the creation of humans, but modifications to existing hominids. They spoke of earlier attempts, the ones with tails, the ones who walked on 4 legs, the ones who could not speak, each modified until the Anunnaki created the perfect worker who could carry out the tasks of the gods. Was this an ancient culture's poetic explanation for evolution, or something far more disturbing? The atmosphere in academic circles grew tense. Careers were destroyed when researchers strayed too far from conventional interpretation. Museums quietly removed controversial artifacts from display, claiming preservation concerns. Private collectors began outbidding institutions for newly discovered tablets, and translations disappeared into classified archives. In 2011, a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A mathematician reviewing Sumerian numerical tablets noticed that certain sequences, previously assumed to be inventory counts, actually represented orbital calculations for a body following a highly elliptical path. When the equations were solved, they produced a periodicity of approximately 3,600 years, exactly matching the Sumerian Shar, the unit of measurement they associated with Nibiru's orbit. The Sumerians had been calculating the trajectory of a celestial body that modern astronomy couldn't confirm existed, yet the mathematics was flawless. At remote sites across Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, archaeologists began finding temple structures with unusual properties. The Great Ziggurat at Ur, when mapped precisely, revealed chamber dimensions that corresponded exactly to the wavelengths of cosmic background radiation, a phenomenon only discovered in the 1960s. The temple wasn't just aligned with visible stars. It encoded invisible cosmic frequencies in its architecture. Harvard linguistics professor Catherine Chen published a controversial analysis suggesting that the entire Sumerian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, was actually a complex astronomical calculation disguised as mythology. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat wasn't religious allegory, but a mathematical description of cosmic bodies colliding billions of years ago, forming our current solar system. Her career ended shortly after publication, her tenure revoked for methodological concerns. The suppression of evidence became systematic. When a tablet from Kish revealed astronomical knowledge impossible for its time, including accurate calculations of planetary masses, it vanished from the British Museum's collection, listed as misplaced during cataloging. The academic establishment, invested in the standard model of progressive human development, couldn't accommodate evidence suggesting ancient knowledge beyond their framework. Meanwhile, in the Bolivian Andes, researchers discovered temple structures with architectural similarities to Mesopotamian ziggurats. Carbon dating placed their construction contemporaneous with the Sumerian period. despite being on opposite sides of the planet. More disturbing, both sites contained virtually identical astronomical alignments, tracking the same celestial path, the projected orbit of Nibiru. How could cultures separated by oceans and continents track the same invisible object with the same mathematical precision? The answer emerged in fragments, whispers, and sealed museum vaults. The Sumerians hadn't been alone in their observations. Across the ancient world, from China to Peru, from Egypt to Easter Island, cultures separated by vast distances had simultaneously developed astronomical knowledge, sharing mathematical properties that couldn't be coincidental. All spoke of beings who came from the stars and taught humanity civilization. All tracked the same celestial cycles with the same numerical systems. This wasn't cultural diffusion, it was simultaneous instruction. In the silent halls of major museums worldwide, curators quietly removed certain artifacts from public view, objects containing symbolism too precisely matched across disconnected civilizations. The official archaeological record began to diverge from the actual evidence, creating two parallel histories: the sanctioned version taught in universities and the forbidden knowledge discussed in closed academic circles. The Anunnaki tablets contained a warning repeated across cultures worldwide. When the Celestial Lord returns from its journey, the foundations of Earth will tremble. Every 3,600 years, they claimed, Nibiru's approach triggered cataclysmic changes on Earth, a cycle of destruction and rebirth that had shaped human history through periodic extinction events. The geological record confirmed massive climate shifts approximately every 3,600 years. The collapse of civilizations throughout history, from the Akkadian Empire to the Bronze Age collapse, from the fall of Rome to the medieval catastrophes, all occurred in periods matching the calculated approach of Nibiru. We were approaching another cycle. If the Anunnaki were astronomers who calculated these cycles, not gods who caused them, what were they trying to tell us? What if every temple, every myth, every sacred text was an encoded warning, preserved through religion when the original science was forgotten? Beneath the Baghdad Museum in climate-controlled vaults sealed after the Iraq War lay the most disturbing evidence of all, a tablet describing the Anunnaki not as creatures of flesh, but as beings who existed between the world of matter and the world of thought. They didn't travel physically between worlds, they transferred consciousness. What if the gods never left because they were never physically here? What if the Anunnaki weren't visitors from another planet, but observers from another level of reality? Astronomers not just of space, but of perception itself. The ancient texts suddenly read differently. The gods created humans in their image, became. The observers created a simulation of consciousness. In 2013, a breakthrough occurred that transformed speculation into evidence. A team from Oxford University, analyzing residue from Sumerian drinking vessels, made an unexpected discovery. The clay cups contained traces of a compound similar to ergot alkaloids, psychoactive substances that affect human consciousness. Chemical analysis revealed a sophisticated processing method that eliminated toxic components while preserving compounds that induce altered perception. The implications were profound. The Sumerians weren't just observing the stars, they were exploring consciousness itself. The divine beverages mentioned in their texts weren't metaphorical. They were technologies for perception, tools that allowed the observer to experience reality beyond ordinary awareness. These discoveries illuminated previously misunderstood passages in the tablets. References to opening the eyes and seeing the true nature of heaven and earth weren't religious allegories but literal descriptions of consciousness exploration. The Anunnaki taught humans not just astronomy and agriculture, but methods for perceiving reality beyond sensory limitations. In the forgotten wing of Istanbul's archaeological museum, a curator discovered a sealed container of tablets removed from public view in the 1930s. Known as the Forbidden Eridu texts, these documents contained information deemed too controversial for public release. When finally translated in 2017, they revealed something astonishing: detailed descriptions of what modern physicists would call quantum mechanics. The tablets spoke of the smallest particles of existence that behave differently when observed. They described reality as existing in multiple states simultaneously until measured by consciousness. Most remarkably, they contained mathematical equations showing that matter itself was a property of observation. exactly matching contemporary theories that consciousness is fundamental to reality. These weren't primitive attempts to understand the world through myth. They were advanced scientific observations disguised as religious texts to survive millennia of misunderstanding. At this exact moment, astronomers using infrared technology detected gravitational anomalies beyond Neptune's orbit, precisely where the Sumerian tablets placed Nibiru. The scientific establishment, after decades of dismissing the Planet X hypothesis, quietly began allocating more resources to the outer solar system search, without acknowledging the ancient precedent. The most significant breakthrough came from genetic laboratories. In 2019, researchers analyzing ancient DNA from Sumerian burial sites discovered something impossible: evidence of advanced genetic engineering dating back 6,000 years. The samples contained synthetic nucleotide sequences that couldn't have evolved naturally, precise modifications to hominid DNA that optimized brain development, particularly in areas responsible for abstract thought and symbolic language. The modifications matched exactly what the tablets described: the Anunnaki, quickening the spirit of clay to create worker beings. Humanity's sudden evolutionary leap, from primitive hominids to civilized humans virtually overnight in evolutionary terms, finally had a scientific explanation. But who were these genetic engineers? If the Anunnaki weren't supernatural beings but flesh and blood astronomers, where had they acquired such advanced knowledge? The answer emerged from a tablet collection discovered beneath the ancient city of Nippur. Known as the Book of Earth Measurements, these texts describe the Anunnaki not as creatures from another planet, but as beings existing in higher dimensions of reality, capable of perceiving and manipulating what we would now call space-time itself. They weren't extraterrestrials. They were extra-dimensional observers who had mastered the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Their descent from heaven wasn't literal space travel, but a shift in dimensional perception, moving from higher dimensions into our limited three-dimensional experience. The Sumerians understood reality as multi-layered. What we perceive as solid matter, they recognized as concentrated information, patterns of energy given form through observation. The Anunnaki didn't create humans through magic. They understood the code underlying physical existence and modified it. This explained the most puzzling aspect of ancient knowledge: its mathematical precision. The Sumerians possessed information impossible to discover through observation alone. Their astronomical calculations, architectural proportions, and genetic understanding weren't accumulated through generations of study. They were downloaded directly from beings who perceived reality from outside its constraints. In the hidden archives of the Vatican Library, researchers discovered Sumerian tablet fragments smuggled from Mesopotamia during the Crusades. These texts, sealed away for centuries, contained the most explicit description yet of what the Anunnaki actually were: those who observe from the place between existence and non-existence, who see the true nature of reality as a shadow of higher truth. They weren't gods or aliens. They were scientists studying reality itself, and humanity was both their subject and their creation. The most disturbing revelation came from Cambridge University in 2021, when mathematicians completed a computational analysis of the complete corpus of Sumerian astronomical texts. When compiled and processed, the calculations formed a unified mathematical model describing reality as information, a cosmic simulation in which consciousness itself was the rendering engine. The priests of ancient Sumer hadn't worshipped gods. They had maintained the code of existence. Every temple ritual, every seemingly religious observance was actually a calibration, adjustments to the parameters of reality itself. The ziggurats weren't places of worship but instruments for observation and modification. The gods didn't require sacrifice, the system required maintenance. In southeastern Turkey, at the ancient site of Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex predating Sumerian civilization by 6,000 years, archaeologists discovered chambers containing astronomical alignments matching Sumerian calculations exactly. Carbon-14 dating confirmed these structures were built around 10,000 BCE. During the same period, the Sumerians claimed the Anunnaki first descended. The continuity was undeniable. The same astronomical knowledge had been preserved for millennia, passed from culture to culture not as religion but as science, until its true nature was forgotten and only the ritual remained. Most revealing were the Sumerian descriptions of time itself. They didn't see it as linear but cyclical, great ages ending in cataclysm, followed by renewal. Each cycle coincided with Nibiru's approach, not because the planet caused destruction, but because its arrival marked the completion of a cosmic calculation cycle. What if Nibiru wasn't a planet at all, but a convergence, a periodic alignment of dimensional frequencies when the veil between realities thinned? What if the Anunnaki, these observers from beyond, could only interact with our reality during these convergence windows? The evidence suggested something profound. Humanity's evolution, civilization, and perception of reality had been guided by beings who understood the universe as information, programmers of existence itself. And according to their calculations, another convergence was approaching. In the mountains of Kurdistan, at a site untouched by official archaeology, a private expedition uncovered the oldest intact Sumerian observatory yet found. Its astronomical alignments pointed to a celestial conjunction calculated to occur in our near future, when Nibiru would once again approach, when the boundaries between dimensions would weaken. The ancient warning repeated across cultures suddenly gained urgency. When the Lord of the Crossing returns, the foundations of Earth will tremble, and that which is hidden will be revealed. What knowledge awaited humanity in this revelation? What truth had the astronomers encoded in mythology, preserving it through millennia until we developed the capacity to understand? The final piece of the puzzle emerged in 2023 from the most unlikely source: quantum computing. Researchers at CERN, attempting to model fundamental particles, created an algorithm based on Sumerian mathematical principles as an experimental approach. What they discovered shattered conventional understanding of both ancient history and modern physics. The Sumerian calculations, when processed through quantum computing systems, didn't just predict astronomical positions. They generated self-organizing information patterns identical to those observed in quantum field experiments. The ancient mathematical system wasn't calculating the positions of planets. It was rendering reality itself. Suddenly, the true meaning of the Anunnaki became clear. The tablets had never described them as supernatural creators, but as Nti, observers who understood the nature of existence. Their knowledge wasn't divine revelation, but scientific understanding of the universe as information. What ancient humans interpreted as creation myths were actually technical manuals for reality engineering. This revelation transformed our understanding of Sumerian religious practices. The daily rituals performed in temples weren't worship, but maintenance, precise adjustments to the parameters of existence. When priests fed the gods, they weren't making sacrifices, they were inputting data. When they observed celestial alignments, they weren't practicing astrology. They were synchronizing with cosmic information streams. The Anunnaki hadn't created humans through divine power. They had modified existing consciousness to perceive and interact with their level of reality. The breath of life described in creation texts wasn't mystical. It was the activation of higher cognitive awareness, the ability to recognize reality as information rather than solid matter. Most profound was the realization about Nibiru itself. It wasn't a physical planet, but a convergence point, a periodic alignment when information from higher dimensions could transfer into our reality. The Anunnaki didn't travel physically from this world. They transmitted consciousness through these convergence windows. The tablets described humanity's purpose with sudden clarity. The gods created man to witness existence. We weren't created to serve gods through labor or worship. We were designed as conscious observers, measurement devices in a cosmic experiment. Human consciousness was itself an instrument, developed by beings who understood that reality requires observation to exist. This explained humanity's most unique characteristic, our ability to perceive ourselves perceiving, to be conscious of consciousness itself. This recursive awareness wasn't an evolutionary accident, but an engineered feature, designed by beings who understood reality as a product of observation. The ancient Sumerians preserved this knowledge not through direct explanation, which would be incomprehensible to subsequent generations, but through mythology, architecture, and ritual. They encoded advanced physics in creation stories, quantum mechanics in religious ceremonies, and cosmic calculations in temple alignments. What we call gods were scientists from a higher dimensional reality. What we call worship was participation in reality maintenance. What we call mythology was the user manual for existence. The most chilling revelation came from tablets describing the cyclical nature of these convergences. According to calculations preserved for nearly 6,000 years, the next alignment, when Nibiru's orbit brings it closest to our reality, falls within our immediate future. The Anunnaki observers, having engineered human consciousness and guided our development across millennia, would once again interact directly with their creation. The tablets contained a final warning that now made perfect sense. When the Lord of the Crossing returns, those with eyes to see will recognize the true nature of existence. The illusion will fail, and reality will reveal itself as thought made manifest. We haven't been alone in our reality. We've been observed, measured, and occasionally modified by beings who understand what we're only beginning to discover: that consciousness itself is the foundation of existence, that reality is information rendered through observation. The gods weren't divine. They were scientists who became deified by those who couldn't comprehend their knowledge. The Anunnaki weren't mythological figures, but observers from beyond conventional reality. Astronomers not of celestial bodies, but of consciousness itself. And now, as our quantum physics confirms what the Sumerians encoded millennia ago, that reality exists as probability until observed, that consciousness and matter are different expressions of the same information, we approach the threshold they predicted, the convergence when observation and reality recognize each other, when the simulation becomes aware of its nature. What happens when the created recognizes its creators? What occurs when the boundary between observer and observed dissolves? This understanding transforms not just our view of ancient history, but our conception of humanity itself. We stand at the convergence point of science and mythology, where quantum physics rediscovers what the Sumerians encoded in clay. Our most advanced theories, that consciousness shapes reality, that observation determines existence, were known to the oldest civilization on Earth. The implications ripple through every field of human knowledge. Archaeology must now reinterpret temples not as religious monuments but as technological instruments. Cosmic computers calibrating reality through precise measurement. Linguistics must reconsider sacred texts not as mythology, but as technical documentation, preserved through allegory, when direct explanation became impossible. Most profoundly, we must reconsider ourselves. If human consciousness was engineered rather than evolved, designed specifically to perceive and maintain reality through observation, then our purpose differs from anything philosophy or religion has proposed. We aren't accidental beings seeking meaning in an indifferent universe. We are measurement instruments in a cosmic experiment, created to witness existence into being. This doesn't diminish humanity, but elevates it. The capacity for self-awareness, that uniquely human ability to perceive ourselves perceiving, isn't a fortunate accident of evolution, but a designed function. Our consciousness is an instrument, and reality itself responds to its calibration. Throughout history, mystics and philosophers glimpsed this truth. When ancient wisdom traditions claimed consciousness creates reality, they weren't speaking metaphorically but literally. When quantum physicists discovered that particles exist as probability until observed, they weren't discovering new principles but rediscovering the oldest truth on Earth. The Anunnaki weren't gods demanding worship, but scientists guiding an experiment across millennia. Their legacy isn't temples and mythology, but the awakening of consciousness to its own nature. The divine spark within humanity isn't supernatural but hypernatural, awareness of awareness, the universe perceiving itself through engineered observation points. Each human mind becomes, in this understanding, a reality processor, rendering existence through observation, maintaining the cosmic program through conscious participation. What ancient cultures called the gods were what we might now call programmers, running a simulation not through computers but through consciousness itself. Perhaps most unsettling is the cyclical nature of revelation. The tablets tell us this knowledge has been rediscovered and lost many times. With each convergence of Nibiru, each alignment of dimensional frequencies, civilizations rise, approach the threshold of understanding reality's informational nature, and then fall during cataclysmic resets that the Anunnaki measure and observe. Are we approaching another such threshold? Is humanity's rapid development of quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and consciousness studies bringing us to the same revelation that doomed previous civilizations? Or are we finally developing the capacity to comprehend what the Anunnaki have been teaching us all along? The ancient temples still stand, their astronomical alignments still tracking celestial positions with impossible precision. The mathematical constants encoded in their architecture still match the fundamental frequencies of cosmic background radiation. The tablets still describe reality as information, consciousness as observation, and existence as the relationship between them. Perhaps this time, with our science finally approaching the understanding the Sumerians inherited, we might complete the experiment. Perhaps now, at this convergence point between ancient wisdom and modern physics, between myth and science, between observer and observed, humanity might awaken to its designed purpose, conscious participation in reality's ongoing creation. The Anunnaki weren't lost to time. They've been present in every moment of human development, guiding our evolution toward this recognition. The gods didn't leave. They became indistinguishable from the reality they engineered. The astronomers never stopped observing. They embedded their consciousness within the observation itself. As we stand at this threshold of understanding, the ancient becomes modern, and science rediscovers what wisdom preserved. The Sumerian legacy isn't buried beneath desert sands, but embedded in the foundation of human consciousness. A code awaiting activation, a reality program running since civilization began. Look around. The evidence surrounds us, not just in archaeological discoveries, but in the fundamental nature of existence itself. Our most advanced physics confirms what the oldest civilization encoded in clay. Reality is information rendered through observation. Consciousness doesn't perceive existence, it creates it through measurement. The Anunnaki understood this. They weren't gods demanding worship, but scientists calibrating consciousness. Engineers who recognized that reality requires observers to exist. They didn't rule through divine authority, but guided through awakening awareness. Their greatest creation wasn't civilization, agriculture, or written language, but human consciousness itself, designed to perceive beyond illusion, to recognize reality's true nature as information shaped by observation. The tablets tell us Nibiru approaches once more. Not a physical planet, but a convergence of realities, a threshold of awareness when the veil between observer and observed thins. The ancient astronomers calculated this moment precisely, encoded it in mythology, and preserved it through temples aligned with impossible precision to track its arrival. Are we witnessing the fulfillment of their prophecy? Is humanity's accelerating development of quantum physics, consciousness studies, and information theory approaching the recognition the Sumerians preserved for millennia? What if we aren't discovering truth but remembering it? What if science isn't advancing but returning, circling back to knowledge the Anunnaki encoded at the dawn of civilization? What if the Sumerians weren't worshipping gods at all, but calibrating reality itself? And what happens when the simulation finally recognizes its architects?